Jordan, nestled in the cradle of humanity, a part of the world deeply entrenched with ancient history, religion, and a lot of conflict. Jordan, however, is somewhat of a peaceful oasis in the middle of a chaotic, war torn region that all of its neighbors can't seem to escape from. Even as someone non religious, you can't help but be so intrigued and feel special to be surrounded by so many historical and religiously significant sites. On my first day there, I already saw ancient Roman ruins, Damascus, the Golan Heights, and the Sea of Galilee, all from one hilltop across three extremely notable countries throughout history. Here we're in the far north of Jordan in a place called Amkai, a site of ancient Roman ruins, one of plenty across Jordan. This isn't even the most famous ones, with the most famous of ancient ruins being in Jerash, and then, of course, there's the ancient city of Petra. But we're not going to start our journey here. Neither will you, most likely. We'll be starting our journey in Amman, where I'd suggest you will fly into, as well as you can get flights from Milan for €30 and most likely from other European cities too, with, of course, Ryanair. Amman is an interesting city because when you first get off the plane and catch the hour-long bus ride into the city with horrendous traffic, you kind of think to yourself, "Oof, where the hell am I?" It's not exactly the best first impressions, but let me tell you, it grows on you. It has some really nice neighborhoods. It's full of viewpoints because it's a very hilly city. There's mosques, there's lots of tea shops, coffee shops, and there's also ancient ruins at the top of the city, including an ancient Roman amphitheater.
Okay, now is a good time to start talking about entrance fees. So, in general, Jordan isn't really a cheap country by any means. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the dinar is actually stronger than the euro and stronger than the British pound. So, yeah, it is a strong currency. So, you see things, it says they're 5 dinar. It sounds cheap, but actually, it's more like 7 or 8 euros when it's 5 dinar. So, really, if you're looking for dinner places, you want to be looking for things that are like 2 dinar. But at a lot of like nice restaurants with nice views per se, a meal is probably like 8 dinar. So it's almost 12 euros. So, yeah, definitely eating out gets expensive unless you're going to cheap shawarma shops every night where you can get a shawarma for 1 dinar, maybe less. But then again, eating shawarma every night is like eating doner kebab every night. So, probably not your go to option. Then talking about attractions, which are, of course, the most expensive part because that's why everyone is coming to the country in the first place. A hostel that I stayed at gave me the recommendation of buying this thing called the Jordan Pass, which I didn't actually know existed. So props to them for letting me know about that. It's about 70 dinar or maybe 75. The difference is if you want 1 day in Petra or two. If you want 2 days in Petra, you should probably buy the 75 dinar pass. If you're happy with 1 day in Petra, 70 dinar is enough. Um, Honestly, I would say you can easily see all of Petra in 1 day. I saw everything in 5 hours. Like, it's not hard. Although, if you're maybe a bit old or you have children, maybe you want to do it over 2 days. Um, yeah, it's really up to you. But you can totally see everything in 5 days, if in 5 hours if you're relatively fit. But the Jordan Pass, it also includes a lot of things like the ancient Roman ruins in Amman, the ancient Roman ruins in Jerash. Um, it doesn't include some things like Mount Nebo, but most things it will include. And if the Jordan Pass does not include them, they will have a sign at the entrance saying we don't take the Jordan Pass, like for instance at Mount Nebo. but it includes most things, which is good. And at first, it sounds really expensive, 70 dinar, but then you realize that Petra alone is almost 50 euros for like a 1 day entrance. And Jarash on its own, I think, is 15. So it adds up pretty quickly. And on top of that, the Jordan Pass includes the visa fee, which is 40 dinar. It says on the government website that you don't need a visa to enter Jordan, but it's not exactly true because when you land, they ask you if you've paid the visa fee, which is 40 dinar. So if you haven't bought it in advance, you pay it there. But the other added benefit of the Jordan Pass is it includes the 40 dinar visa fee. So between the visa fee and Petra, you've already paid for both of those just in the Jordan Pass. So it becomes clear pretty quickly that it is worth buying the Jordan Pass.
Here we're in the north of Jordan at one of its many amphitheatres. Jordan is home to several amphitheatres, the most famous probably being the one in Petra that was built in the first century AD, and it is home to about it can fit about 8,500 spectators. And then you had the Southern Theatre of Jerash, which was probably my favorite, and it can fit around 3,000 to 5,000 spectators, and it was built around 90 AD. You also had the Northern Theatre of Jerash for about 1,600 spectators, and it was built in the late first century AD. It was at first actually the council's chambers for all the city officials, and then it expanded into being a performance stage later on. Then, of course, there's the theatre in Amman, which is close to the ruins I showed you previously at the top of the hill in Amman, but it only fits about 500 spectators, so it's a bit smaller, and it was mainly just used for musical performances instead of like big performances for all of the civilization. This one was built around the second century AD. And then, of course, there is the biggest one in Amman, which was also built in the second century AD, and it's for around 6,000 spectators. But so this one is, yeah, pretty impressive. This viewpoint here is a good reflection of a lot of Jordan's terrain, really, especially towards Amman. I was surprised by how hilly the country was. You could say mountainous too, I suppose, but um, for me, I would say it's more like hills. But either way, the country definitely wasn't completely flat, which I kind of expected. Um, when you go to the south of the country, it is pretty much flat, except you, of course, have Wadi Rum, which has all these like little, I don't want to call them mountains, hills, maybe rock structures in the middle of the desert. So um, it's not completely flat, but it's definitely, yeah, low elevation. But in the north around Amman and especially towards the borders with Syria and going towards Jerusalem, it is actually all quite elevated, and you go up and down and up and down, and you have all these amazing viewpoints of cities in the bottom of the valley. So the landscape is, I would say, better than I thought. Like, I was pleasantly surprised overall by Jordan. And for instance, in the far south, in like Aqaba, where it is completely flat and at sea level, it is super hot. Even in the middle of winter, it is like 26 degrees. But in Amman, it's the complete opposite. It is around like 12, 13 degrees, and it rains all the time, and there's a very strong wind. So in winter in Amman, I was actually more cold than back home in the north of Italy. Amman itself is around 770 meters of elevation, so above sea level. So it's not that much, but yeah, it was surprising how cold it gets. And obviously, Jordan is the land of extremes when it comes to topography because they're also home to the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea, which is about minus 430 meters below sea level. And it's, of course, famous for being the lowest land point on Earth. But it is shrinking each year due to water diversion and climate change. However, it is still massive. When you drive there, you can see pretty clearly where the water used to be versus where it is now. But it's so big to me, it almost feels like looking out at the ocean because you can see mountains on both sides of the Dead Sea. And yeah, it really, really looks like you're just looking out to the ocean and there's, you see another country across the ocean. That's what it feels like. So it's huge and it's not going to be disappeared anytime in the next 10 years, let's just say that. And so the highest point in Jordan is actually a peak in Wadi Rum. Like I was saying, there are lots of little mountains formations within the desert, which is what makes it so spectacular, the contrast, the difference in heights. And this is located in Wadi Rum, but near the Saudi border. Um, because of course in Wadi Rum you're very close
Gotta keep the
to
villages in order.
several borders, but the Saudi is to the south, southeast. And this is called Jabal Ad Dami, and it is 1,854 meters above sea level. So then you also have the Jordan Valley, which is close to the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River, which is the main water source. And it flows for about 251 kilometers. Um, then you have a large area of desert to the east of Jordan, which is actually where you can find uh, maybe 4 or 5 abandoned castles out there, and they're just sort of in the middle of nowhere. So it's really strange when you see them because you kind of think, oh, why would anyone build this here? Um, but this area of Jordan covers, yeah, most of the country. Like 75% of Jordan's land area is this desert to the east, where there's not really anything out there except, yes, there are these abandoned castles, which are now like tourist sites. And of course, it is also how you get to Iraq. The main highway goes straight out towards Baghdad. As you can imagine, it's impossible to talk about Jordan without mentioning its history, because perhaps one of the most famous elements of Jordan is its history, specifically its biblical history, which I think brings a lot of tourism. Other than Petra, it gets a lot of religious tourism, and even if people aren't religious, they still come here just to see sites mentioned in the Bible.
So let's talk about prehistoric Jordan. So there's evidence of human settlement dating back to before 3000 BCE, the Paleolithic periods. Sorry, I struggle with that word. Yeah, over 200,000 years ago. There's also a site near Amman, which is known to be one of the earliest agricultural communities, dating back to 7200 BCE, and this is called the Neolithic site of Ain Ghazal. It's interesting that this culture of agricultural communities settling rather than continuing to be nomadic hunter and gatherers like our ancestors actually mainly started to emerge in the desert regions. Petra is interesting to note of this that it was also one of the earliest sites of just of an agricultural and trade-based community that were all living together and living off trade and growing crops. They were actually able to get quite a big water supply into Petra based on the way that they built the city. And even now, if there's heavy rain somewhere like Amman, you actually have to evacuate Petra because flash flooding can start at any moment, and it gets really, really bad because the way the city was built was to try and capture as much water as they could because obviously it's in the desert. But yeah, still to this day, it gets really badly affected by flash floodings because of that. So then came the Bronze and Iron Ages of civilization. So this was like from 3000 afterwards to 332 BCE, thereabouts. So these were the real early kingdoms that were mentioned in the Bible. So these were the ancient kingdoms of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Around here was also the time that Jordan was influenced by the Egyptian, Assyrian, and Babylonian empires. And then after this came the Persian rule from like 539 up until 332 BCE, when Jordan became part of the massive, massive Persian Empire. So after the time of the Persian Empire, I say after, but I mean like closer to modern day. I think you get what I mean. Alexander the Great came and conquered the region in 332 BCE. So this kind of marks the start of a new era because this is, let's call, the Roman period. So when Alexander the Great came, he introduced Greek culture, which was when Petra was built. So in the 4th century BCE to 106 CE is estimated. And they started controlling the trade routes. So, like I was saying, they had an agricultural community within Petra, and this is where trade really started to take off. But then Petra became, let's say, the hub for controlling trade routes outside of Jordan as well, not just internally. So this is how they became to be such a rich, such a rich community. And these people in Petra, they were called the Nabateans. So the Roman rule, which started around 106 CE, was when Rome annexed this area for the Nabateans, like including Petra, and they created the province of Arabia Petraea. The cities of Jerash and Philadelphia, which is now Amman, like flourished under the Roman rule. So this is really where modern day Amman and Jerash started, back here in the Roman rule. So around the same time, of course, because of the Roman rule, Christianity started to spread and churches were built. After the Christianity time, the Islamic, um, let's say the Islamic period sort of began as well. Um, we saw the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, which led to the Islamic rule. And this is actually when the desert castles were built, the ones that I mentioned you see out east on the way to Iraq. This is when those castles were built. So they were built during the Islamic rule or the Islamic period. So, not long after this, maybe around 750 CE, Jordan's power started to decline as the power shifted to Baghdad and Cairo.
Crusaders built the Karak and Shobak castles, which are in the north of Jordan, and there's quite famous tourist destinations still. But they were later recaptured by Saladin. The controlled trade routes between Egypt and Syria became quite an important part of Jordan's topography in the area of like 1263 CE to 1516. But the big tipping point around 1516 CE was when Jordan became part of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years. So this region saw economic decline with the Bedouin tribes dominating the desert. And the Bedouin are, of course, what is famous in Wadi Rum. The people in Wadi Rum are the Bedouin tribe. So their history is going all the way back, well, before the Ottoman Empire, but they start to really flourish in the Ottoman rule. So in 1908, this is when the Hijaz Railway linked Damascus to Medina, passing through Jordan. And you can still see the remains of that railway through Wadi Rum, although it's not active at this time. So 1916 to 1946 sees the start of the Great Arab Revolt and British Mandate. So the Great Arab Revolt from 1916 to 1918, led by Sharif Hussein of Mecca with British support. So we all know him as Lawrence of Arabia. There's a book about him, there's movies about him. But yeah, so this is the time of Lawrence of Arabia and the British Mandate. So Jordan became the Emirati of Transjordan, and the British controlled foreign policy and the economy in the region. And like with most of British Mandate, of course, there are many, many problems. In fact, Lawrence of Arabia kind of became famous because he felt guilty of what the Brits did to Jordan under this time and how they lied to the Arab people there. So in 1946, Jordan gained its independence and became what it's known as today, which is the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So now from this time on, we call it 1946 to present modern Jordan because it's the Jordan that we still know in modern day. So this is when King Abdullah the First, so from 1946 to 1951, unified Jordan, but he was assassinated in Jerusalem. And then after King Abdullah the First, we have King Hussein, and he ruled for nearly 50 years. Maybe we could say is responsible for the most of modernizing Jordan. So in 1967, in the famous Six-Day War, the West Bank was lost to Israel, and in 1994, Jordan signed a peace treaty with Israel. So now we come to the ruler who is in charge still today, which is King Abdullah II. So he's been ruling Jordan since 1999, and he focuses more on economic reforms and stability, which I must say, I think he's doing a pretty good job in that regard because Jordan is widely considered as the most stable country in the region in terms of peace, but also in terms of economy, which maybe is why Jordan's currency is very strong, but also um, they seem to be doing okay compared to their neighbors because there is trade with the West and things are quite expensive. So, yeah, I think for a country that doesn't have like tons of natural resources, like its Gulf state neighbors, it's doing exceptionally well considering where it's placed geographically. But that kind of brings us now to where Jordan is in modern day. We still have King Abdullah II in charge of the country, and a lot of Jordan's economy now is also reliant on tourism, which is why they've been struggling so much at the moment because obviously of what's going on next door. Um, they've lost a lot of tourism. For example, in Petra, when I was there were maybe like 100 or 200 people in the whole city, which is phenomenal, really, because
on an average day, Jordan sees around 3,000 people coming through Petra. So obviously, as a tourist now, you're like, oh, this is great. But for the people of Jordan, for the businesses in Jordan, it's tough. And when you talk to just local people, whether it be a taxi driver or someone working in tourism, they're very open about how much the decline in tourism has affected them. They're optimistic. They think as soon as the war is over, that tourists should start coming back to Jordan in big numbers. So let's hope so. So I think it's interesting to reference some of the big biblical events and history and sites that are in Jordan or took place in what is known as Jordan today. Because even for us that are not religious, I think most of us will know of the people or the moments in history, in the biblical history. So, dating back to the Exodus and Moses in Jordan, so the Israelites were said to have traveled through Jordan's lands during their 40-year journey to the Promised Land, which brings you to Mount Nebo. So, when you stand on the top of Mount Nebo, you can see out to the Dead Sea, to Israel, and you can also see Palestine, Jericho. You can see all the way to Jerusalem on a good day. At the top of Mount Nebo, you see the bronze serpent, which was said to have been left there by Moses to heal the Israelites from their snake bites on their journey. And it's really interesting standing on Mount Nebo because you think back to Moses' time and you're like, wow, was he really here looking out at the promised land, but he wasn't allowed to enter? So then the Israelites were said to have fought King Sihon of the Amorites and King Og of Bashan before crossing the Jordan River into Canaan or the Promised Land. The Jordan River parted as the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land, similar to the Red Sea miracle. So this event took place near the modern day site of Bethany beyond the Jordan, which you can go still see now. So after this was said to have been the prophets and the kings in Jordan. So Elijah and Elisha crossing the Jordan River on dry ground, and then Elijah was taken to heaven in a chariot of fire near the Jordan River. So Elisha purified the waters of Jericho's springs, which Jericho, I think, is the possibly the lowest, probably the lowest, but definitely the oldest city on earth that is still inhabited. It is now part of Palestine, and you can see it super easily from Mount Nebo. So Elisha was said to have healed Naaman, the Syrian commander, at the Jordan River. So there's a lot and a lot of, as you can see, deeply like religiously important sites and moments that happened around the Jordan River. And so let's go back, go more forward in time. So John the Baptist was said to have preached and baptized people in the Jordan River, and Jesus was also baptized here by John. So as you can imagine, very, very holy site. The baptism site of Jesus, you can actually enter. I think it costs 15 Jordanian dinar though, and I don't believe the Jordan Pass covers it. I think you can buy a Jordan Pass that you can pay extra to get a discount on the baptism site, but I think you still have to pay something. So, yeah, you can go see the baptism site of Jesus. It's like a big closed up area. It's actually on the border of Jordan and Israel, like it's right near King Hussein Bridge crossing, which is the border crossing you have to take to get from Amman to Jerusalem or Amman to Jericho. So yeah, it's just a super interesting region because of the baptism, but also because it's super close to the Dead Sea and it's super close to the border, which is obviously still like a highly contested area. So a lot of these like religious sites are highly contested in general. So the fact that it's still
Even the
going
lowest
on
mountain with the
today
sun.
just kind of shows you how important it is to so many people and so many different religions. But then to talk about early Christianity in Jordan and
Petra. It's interesting to note that some scholars believe early Christians sought refuge in Petra after fleeing Jerusalem. To talk about what to expect in Jordan as a female tourist, Jordan feels extremely safe. There wasn't really any concern at all walking around alone, even at night. You don't really get weird looks. You just kind of get people very excited to show like what little English they can speak. Yeah, all around it's very good environment, very good atmosphere, and yeah, you don't feel harassed, you don't feel unsafe or super out of place. In terms of dressing, I went in winter, so I was fully covered anyway because it was so cold. In fact, what I would say though is to go to like the hot springs, I would recommend not wearing a bikini, just wear like a full size t shirt or something like this. Because there's a lot of local men that go there and they do actually give you weird looks even before you get in the water. So definitely, I would not have wanted to be there in a bikini. But at the Dead Sea, especially at the free swimming spot and the hotels, it's totally fine to wear a bikini. They get, of course, a lot and a lot of Western tourists, so they're used to it. No one really bats an eyelid. But yes, that's what I would say in terms of traveling there as a woman. Just sort of read the vibes. Like if there's no other women in the water, then I probably wouldn't wear a bikini. It probably like you, I would see local women waiting outside for their husbands. I don't know if that's because of the culture or because they just didn't want to go in. But yeah, you can tell from the looks that you're getting whether it's appropriate or not. What you can see now is the beach club in Aqaba in the far south of Jordan. Really, the last thing I expected to see in Jordan is this tropical looking beach resort. But that's the beauty of Jordan. It really does just have so many landscapes that you think you'll come and it's just a flat desert, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This area, Aqaba, is so interesting because you can see an Egyptian city of the Sinai Peninsula region. You can see a Saudi Arabian city. You're in Aqaba, and you can see Elliot, an Israeli city. So you're seeing like four different countries from this one point. So it really is such an interesting place to be. Aqaba is famous for diving in the Red Sea, and as is the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. But the Jordan side is significantly more expensive, so I think a lot of people opt to go to the Egyptian side. Now, to talk about how much time you probably need in Jordan, a lot of tourists were doing the whole country in 5 days, which you totally can if you're on a time crunch. Like, you can see most of the sites in 5 days, although it will be pretty tiring and super busy. And it isn't that easy to get around Jordan unless you rent your own car. Like, the bus system isn't that great. There's not frequent public buses. You need to organize tourist buses in advance, and they don't leave very frequently during the day, sometimes only one a day. Like the jet bus to Petra, which is like the biggest bus company in Jordan, they were only leaving at 6:30 a.m. And that was the only the only time slot. And then from Petra, there is only one bus to Wadi Rum, for example, and it leaves at I think 5:30 p.m. So then you wouldn't actually get to the desert until dark. So it's not super convenient, the public transport. So I think it's definitely better to give yourself more days, like plan for something going wrong, plan with the thought in your mind that maybe the buses aren't going to be convenient and you'll have to wait another day, these kinds of things. So maybe a week is a good time frame. I spent almost a month, but you totally don't need that long. In fact, I went to Jerusalem because I had so much extra time. I was like, well, I'm so close. I should go. Like, I wasn't planning on going, but I'm glad I did. I'll make another video about crossing the land border into Jerusalem because that was, of course, very complicated, but that will be in my next video.